Let's say you want to try your hand at some mold ripened or maybe a mold kissed rind, but your cozy cottage lacks a mountain cave or a cold dank dungeon. Basement. In this economy, with this generational wealth, so what's a peasant to do? What are some cost-effective ways at home that you can implement right away to get started? By the end of this video, I'll give you the tools that you need to know, what to build to fit your needs, how to navigate humidity and those temperature hurdles, as well as other aging techniques that'll take your cheeses above the rest of the flock. Hello shepherds, welcome back. And if you're new here, hello! This is where we talk all things sheepy. My name's Megan, and today we're talking cheese caves, or affinage, which is just a fancy word for refining and aging cheeses. And so, when it comes to making a bloomy rind cheese, wash rind cheeses, or hard cheeses, such as a brie, Munster, or even cheddars, learning how to navigate your options for mini cheese caves can really take your cheeses from young and fresh to something a little more earthy, mushroomy, and dynamic. Okay, when it comes to cheese caves, it doesn't matter what size or shape they come in. I want you to think about the 3 keys to successful aging. And the 3 keys to make sure that you're successful are temperature, moisture, and airflow. With these 3 things combined, we can turn anything into a cheese cave. So let's go over your options. Starting off with our most cost-effective cheese cave, especially if you live in a warmer region, we have our babiest of caves, where ultimately the biggest struggle will be temperature. Then secondary, humidity, a plastic box in a household fridge or cold area. So let's build a baby one together. I'm using a plastic container, and ideally we want a container that's tall enough to easily fit our cheeses, usually 1 to 2, with a secure lid. For our base moisture layer, some folks use paper towels. I use a cheesecloth soaked to field capacity level. So soaked and then squeezed well so no more than 2 drops are released from the cloth. We don't want any city moisture touching the cheese, since that will cause unwanted molds to form and then stunt our white molds. So to keep our cheese up and off our moisture pad, we need something like a plastic mesh mat or a bamboo sushi mat cut to fit inside. I'm using a homemade ceramic tile. I can sterilize it easily, but mainly anything that's cleanable and food safe to keep our cheeses from staying our moisture or touching the cheese will help. It also helps to have an extra mat so that it can be replaced with fresh, clean mats as needed. Aside from that, our box is ready to pop in the fridge. Household fridges are commonly a bit too cold for mold-ripened cheeses, so what happens is the white molds tend to be a little sluggish at that temperature, so when trying to overtake our rind before any of those bad molds come in, so that's where they tend to struggle a little bit. You will need to also open the lid occasionally to help with the air exchange. But a fun trick from the gourmet mushroom growing groups is a shotgun method. For that, we need the same box, a Dremel or a drill, whatever you're comfortable with to use safely to create our holes. And I'm using a clean polyfill as my filter. And for drilling, we're just going to drill a small hole on both sides of the box and adjust our size and amount of holes to fit the needs of our container. So it's a bit rough, but it fills a need or a niche. And for our keys, the downsides are it's a really limited space. The temps generally are lower than ideal, and the moisture levels can actually run a bit high. So it's really important to wipe down the sides often and rehydrate our moisture later as needed. For airflow, generally there's very little chance for airflow, but overall to fix these problems, for the temperature it helps to move the box to the warmest spot in our fridge. This tends to be different for each fridge, but usually it's closer to the front or the door. For moisture, we already fixed that through our moist towelettes or wiping the container down, as well as elevating our cheeses. And for airflow, each time we check on our cheese, it introduces fresh air. But also keeping the cheese in a space that's around 60% bigger is a pretty good guide for space needs. And then we also have our shotgun method, which is really effective in promoting that air exchange. So what if you want a cheese cave, but bigger? Let me introduce you to a bigger plastic box, our Bebe Cave number 2, i.e. the cooler. This one takes a bit more modifications, but it can handle more cheeses, which is a delicate but delicious challenge. I made some wood shelf inserts from untreated food-safe wood to fit inside. Everything is able to move around, take out, clean, or stack. I've added thumb holes on the end of each plank to make them easier to insert and remove from our bigger plastic box. The wood does expand with the higher humidity, so keep that in mind when forming your planks. Some planks here are stained from our charcoal rinds, but also the wood does form a sort of haven for mold spores. So some of the white streaking you see in the planks here is from white mold spreading throughout the wood, creating a sort of reservoir to further inoculate our other cheeses. To me, this is a really good thing. But for some folks, it can be a bad thing, depending on molds as well as personal preferences. On the bonus side though, wood is biodegradable, so if you want to dispose of it, instead of taking up trash space, it can get composted in the garden. Airflow in this bigger box can be an issue, especially when it's getting packed full, but it holds humidity really well. And it's really easy to wipe down and clean up. To clean each board, I use hot soapy water and then air dry it on a bright sunny day. For temperature regulation, I use frozen bottles and ice packs to lower the internal temps over the hot season. In the colder season, it's the opposite problem. So there's a bit of moving around our aging cave to a better location based on ambient temperatures, and then replacing our ice packs as needed, especially so on those high heat days, or if you don't have a working AC, or it's just really, really hot. It can take several ice packs on constant rotation to keep cool. I have this janky thermometer that's pretty solid, and for monitoring humidity, I found the hydrometers kind of really wig out after a year or so, especially when trying to dial in these higher moisture needing cheeses. So I mostly lean into watching the cheese development for feedback on whether it's too dry or too wet. Our freezer packs do add moisture, and the younger cheeses also add moisture initially as they begin to age, and then slowly dry out more. So to supplement during the drier aspects of the aging, I may add a tray of water or a jar with a sponge or a ceramic moisture diffuser. But a sponge pretty much works the same way as well. They not only work really well to keep that moisture up in the air, but they're really easy to clean, which I like. The main thing though is to make sure that the cheese is not sitting in its own fluids or in condensation. So wiping down the sides often, not being afraid to take everything out and wiping it down. From young mold-ripened cheeses, especially, those can really drain a lot of whey out a bit for a few days. So it helps to move it around, keep it elevated, and the white molds can really grow really fast. So it really helps to flip or even gently lift up the cheese and then set it back down multiple times a day even, depending on how much growth you're getting. Plastic mats are flexible and a really good option to help with that aggressive white mold growth, but just lifting it up at least twice a day really helps in combat the cheeses from sticking to our surfaces. So for our 3 keys, I found temperature management to be really the trickiest part, depending on season. So how hot your house is or how hot your room is, it can be a bit more work to keeping those freezing bottles and rotating packs when the temperature is already naturally just in that ideal range. For moisture, it keeps it really well, and depending on the age of the cheese or how packed your cooler is, you may have a little bit more work in wiping down your cooler more or taking everything out, draining that water off the bottom of the cooler every couple days even, but much less depending on how packed or aged your cheeses are. For airflow, it's perfect when it's nearly empty, but as it fills up with cheeses, it definitely gets trickier and benefits from being opened frequently. Okay, so next up we have our next size, Bebe Cave, our tiny fridge. Mine's pretty packed full. It's 2 wheels deep and stacked. When you're first starting out, I definitely don't recommend copying what you see here. It does create its own set of issues. We can manage it, but for the sake of this video, we're going to ignore that aspect. So just like with the other Bebe Caves, we have our cheeses that are on a mat, whether it's bamboo, a mesh, or a ceramic. I've made some thin ceramic inserts for here as well. I've been experimenting with this for natural rind aging, and I use them as a sort of mini shelf that I can keep clean and sterilize. And since as they age, the rind is continually developing molds, the natural rinds of these cheeses actually can stick together, even with flipping, and they really need a lot of room to breathe. So we have this temperature regulator where the fridge plugs into the controller, and there's a sensor that goes into the fridge. For this mini fridge, this temperature sensor has been life-changing in terms of keeping our temperature stable. before using it, with all the activity of flipping various cheeses and managing the cheese load, it would overcool and then overcompensate and freeze over. So there was a lot of temperature fluctuations that were really bad for aging cheeses long term and gain a consistent result. The temperature regulator had fixed that issue. So in terms of moisture, one of the biggest challenges is maintaining that humidity that meets the needs for your rind goal. Usually that means above 80% humidity, and there's little airflow in the fridge. It's not very strong, but it can dry the cheeses out if I'm not careful with that moisture balance. Waxing or vacuum packing helps the wheels from developing those cracks from drying, and some people do like to use a humidifier in their fridges to help with this. I've decided against a humidifier so that I can squeeze in a few more wheels in the space instead. So instead of a humidifier, I opt for a jar of water with some homemade ceramic diffusers. These ones are Totoro inspired, and I have an online shop that I'll link them to if you want them. But when it comes to home cheese making, there's a lot of making things yourself. So for some other problems that I've encountered with these tiny fridges, the cooling element in the back can pick up a lot of condensation, and then it drips water down the back of the fridge, which can ruin some cheeses. So that's something to keep in mind with this style of fridge. I try to color code my natural rinds because it does get a little confusing over time in trying to sort them. Some are ash rubbed, and then I have a pink jack over in the front, as well as a blue manchego and a yellow gouda. The family like wine and beer soaked rinds, so they're on the left, but they tend to age into this conglomerate, just old looking cheese. They're really flavorful, and ideally I think we or most folks would really like a big setup, or a mountain cave perhaps, but with some space management, a baby cave can really take your cheeses to that next level. Especially with mold ripened cheeses, at least a mini cave number 1 will really help get that experience under your belt in the most cost and space effective way. And so sometimes even with the best intentions, molds may not grow how we intended. So let's go ahead and troubleshoot a little. If your cheeses are too cold, they ripen much slower, if at all. So they'll end up lacking that character development that gives them that tang or earthy pop. If your temperatures are too hot, they just speedrun aging, and it doesn't look good. Is your cheese 15 or is it 50? We want it mature and well-aged, not half-baked and a squeaker. And that's what halloumi is for. If your cheeses are sitting in puddles of whey or condensation, think swamp feet, but for cheese. Wipe your cave down, elevate your cheese, get it up and out of that water. Airflow can be a big issue, but depending on what kind of box you're using, even a simple action of checking your cheeses is often enough. But that shotgun modification might help if you're using a smaller cave, and ultimately, just giving your cheeses enough room for airflow will solve a lot of problems. With airflow, think of it more as a less breeze-like and more like air exchange when you're breathing in and breathing out. If you end up going for a mini fridge style cheese cave, I definitely recommend a temperature controller. Maybe a humidifier too, depending on your cheese wishes or lifestyle goals. It is possible to make it more hands-off, but usually that involves tech that I'm really not good at. Ultimately, these baby caves will get you on your moldy way. Just keep the 3 keys in heart: temperature, humidity, and airflow. Is the temperature ideal? Is the humidity on point? And can the cheeses breathe? If you've made it this far, an extra special thank you. I appreciate you. Please like, share, and subscribe, and let me know what you're thinking in the comments below. And I'll see you in the next one. Ta-tas!